All right. Well, we're going to get started. Want to make sure that we stay on time. And yeah, let me get this moving here. So, today we are going to talk about breaking the burnout cycle, how we build resilience with mental fitness. And it's my intention that by the end of our time together today, you will have a much better understanding of how to manage stress and other negative emotions in the moment that can prevent us from being productive, happy, healthy, remaining calm, and curious in the midst of challenges. So, that is my intention. I would like to share a little backstory about myself just to give you a better understanding of why I am so passionate about this topic. So, back in 2005, after a 26-year career in the corporate retail sector, I reached burnout. And I equate it to slamming into a cement wall. I was done. I had no more mental bandwidth to continue on my current course. I was 65 pounds overweight, suffering from chronic migraines, digestive issues. My marriage was strained. And I remember waking up one morning and the world just looked gray, devoid of color. And I realized at that point I had hit rock bottom. So, in a moment of desperation, I left a long term career at a high salary without an exit strategy, which resulted in bankruptcy down the road. And I share all of that with you to say that it all could have been prevented. Had I done a better job managing my stress, I could have prevented burnout. And I certainly would have been more intentional about leaving my current career and transitioning into something else, which obviously would have prevented bankruptcy. So I don't know where you are in your life journey. I certainly hope you are nowhere near where I was. But if you are exhibiting any sort of warning signs like tension headaches or maybe indigestion, maybe you're having trouble sleeping, all of these are key indicators that something is up. And if you do not address these, they can turn into far more serious health problems, which we don't want to continue with. So, with that, let's dive into what actually is mental fitness. Now, as I go through this, I'm going to ask questions. So, feel free to unmute and volunteer any information because I want to make this as interactive as possible. So, what is mental fitness? Well, by definition, it's your capacity to respond to life's challenges with a positive versus a negative mindset. And the outcome of this or the impact is that you're highly productive, you have peak performance, you have greater peace of mind and well being, and you have healthier relationships due to improved communication. All good things. So, the research supporting positive intelligence was founded by Shirzad Chamine, and he is a PhD. He teaches Stanford students. He's also an executive coach, and he did extensive research that incorporated positive psychology, performance science, neuroscience, and cognitive behavioral psychology. And at the core, he developed this modality called positive intelligence. And it's really an operating system. And you'll understand that as we go on. So, just so that you know that it was well tested, the research included results from, it's actually more like thousands now, but at the time, it was hundreds of CEOs and their executive team. Stanford students, world class athletes, and over 500,000 participants from 50 different countries. So it was extensively tested, including many YPO families and forums. And the research basically is summarized in greater depth in his best-selling book entitled Positive Intelligence, which he has it in audiobook as well, or ebook, and it takes a much deeper dive into what we're talking about today and is really fascinating about how our brains actually influence our behavior in positive and negative ways and can often prevent us from being happy, healthy, successful, and fulfilled. So the results of Shirzad's factor analysis research conclude that there are three core muscles at the root of mental fitness. They're inclusive of the saboteur interceptor, what we call the sage, and also the self-command. You're probably going, what the heck are these? Well, I'm going to talk about those. So let's move on. Now, to really understand how mental fitness works, we have to understand how our brains work. And we have two sides of our brain. We have the left analytical side, which was designed for problem solving, one task at a time. But where we get into trouble is when we multitask and do too many things at the same time. Ever been in that situation where you're multitasking and you're juggling a lot of balls? What can happen if you're trying to juggle too many things? Any thoughts?
I find that often I will swing between um, hyper focusing on one thing uh, and then jumping before that's done to the next thing,
Mm-hmm.
or just sort of letting all the things bounce around. So it's a lack of productivity and it adds to stress.
It sure does. That was perfectly said. Perfectly said. So, stress is just one of the negative emotions or byproducts of multitasking, this behavior. And all of our negative emotions that we experience, albeit stress, anxiety, overwhelm, shame, blame, judgment, lack of self-confidence, all of those stem from the left side of our brain. Now, the left side of our brain, again, was designed for problem solving, and we need it, but it can get us into trouble with these self-deprecating thoughts and their corresponding behavior. And according to positive intelligence, we have what we call 10 saboteur traits that are aligned with negative thought patterns and how they're influencing our behavior. And we're going to go over those in more detail here in a moment. But suffice it to say that we have over 70,000 thoughts a day. Now, many of these are on repeat and they bubble up from our subconscious. So we're not aware that we're having them, but we have them nonetheless. And 80% of those 70,000 thoughts are negative. So it's really a wonder that we can have a positive thought some days. Now, we also have the right side of our brain, which is known as the sage in positive intelligence. And when you're operating from the right side of their brain, there are 5 sage powers that you can use to navigate challenges. And we're going to talk about those in a bit. But one thing I want to ask you, have you ever had a day where everything just seemed like it was in perfect alignment? You were happy, you were energized, your conversations with others were engaging, and you really felt a strong sense of connection. You were very productive. You just emotionally and physically felt great. Can you recall a day like that?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, hopefully it was more recent than later, but that is an example of you swimming in the right side of our brain or your sage brain. And that is where you should be operating the majority of the time. Unfortunately, those negative influencers, those saboteur traits, often prevent us from operating from the right side of our brain. Now, when we do operate from that right side, we have clear, calm, laser focused. We're able to respond to empathy in like conflicting situations. We are peaceful, we're calm, we're curious. Challenges do not overwhelm us. let's talk about these saboteur traits, because I want you to have a really firm understanding of how they could be influencing your behavior. Now, these traits, we have all of them, but there are some that are more dominant than others. Towards the end of this presentation, you are actually going to have an opportunity to take a short assessment that will provide you with the link to this short questionnaire that you can learn what your top saboteur traits are. So you're going to have the opportunity later on. But let's start with a judge. So the judge is the universal saboteur. And the judge not only judges us with those negative thoughts, like, I'm not good enough, I could never do that, I'll never, make that kind of income. The judge also judges others. And we don't like to say that we judge others, but we do it all the time. We could be judging people's political beliefs or their religious beliefs or even what they're wearing. And most times we would never vocalize that, but we have these fleeting judgmental thoughts all the time, and they're very toxic. And those come from the judge, just like those self-deprecating thoughts that the judge tells us, like, I'm not worthy, I can't do that. And then the judge will also judge circumstances. And that could be you wake up, you go to a meeting at work, and you walk in the door and it is just a complete mess. It just seems like, oh my gosh, everything that could possibly go wrong is going wrong. And instead of responding from the positive sage perspective, you're going down this negative spiral saying, oh, this is going to be a terrible day. This is getting my day off to just a horrible start and everything's going to be bad. So the judge, again, judges you, judges others, and judges circumstances. Now, let's talk about the accomplice saboteurs that work in conjunction with the judge. Now, each of these accomplice saboteurs actually stem from a positive sage quality, but that quality is taken to the extreme and therefore becomes dysfunctional. And I think you'll understand as I go through these. So let's talk about the controller. Now, control is not a bad thing. If you have ever worked for an organization and you're leading a team or a project, you have to exercise some sort of control, because people will just run around, do whatever they want, deadlines will not be adhered to, and it could just be total chaos. And if you've ever had children, when they're small, you have to establish boundaries, because they could either, one, get themselves into trouble or harm themselves. So control, again, not a bad thing. But when it goes to the extreme, it turns into the micromanager. Have you ever worked for a micromanager? Ever had a micromanager in your life?
I have not, but I know people that have.
Yes. And the micromanager or the controller has this intense need to control. They get incredibly anxious if they cannot be in control of that situation, because it's their belief that things won't get done, and they won't get done well unless they are in complete control. And they even go so far as to think that everybody else wants them in control. So that's the controller. Now we have the hyperachiever. So the great qualities of the hyperachiever is they're very goal-oriented, task-driven. They can be very successful, but they struggle with recognizing their achievements. And what I mean by that is because they're so focused on that next big milestone, they don't take the time to really recognize achievements. They're thinking, okay, I need to move on. There's that next major milestone. Now, this happens to be one of my saboteur traits. And again, although you can be successful, you're not always happy because you're generating so much stress trying to just keep focused on that next big thing. And then we have the restless. And the restless is the epitome of the multitasker. They have their hands in all different kinds of things. And it can generate stress. More so in the restless, it's because they have this innate desire to just want excitement all the time. They like things fresh and new. And when things start to feel routine and mundane, then they can really, really become frustrating. So this is you. Okay, interesting. So the restless person can be a strategic thinker, can be great with idea generation, but when it comes time to execute, is not always great at that because it's not exciting. So they move on to something else. Next, we have the stickler. Anybody who wants to be a perfectionist out there or is a perfectionist, or so they like to think they're a perfectionist? Yeah, perfectionism does not exist. But according to the stickler, you have to be as perfect as possible because why do something if you can't do it perfectly? And they put a just unreasonable amount of stress on themselves with this intense need to attend, for attention to detail. Now, again, attention to detail is not a bad thing, especially if you are an analyst or could be even HR. If you're handling a lot of confidential records, if you're a medical doctor, software engineer, these are just generic examples. But the point being, attention to detail, not a bad thing. But when taken to the extreme, it is that person that just has this incessant need to be perfect all the time. And that can generate a lot of stress for the people around them. And now we have the pleaser. And the pleaser wants to make others happy. They are highly empathetic, which is a great quality, especially when it comes to having quality relationships with others. But their downfall is that they're always focused on the needs and desires of other individuals, and they leave very little for themselves. And as a result, they can be very stressed out and they can also feel resentment. And then we have the hypervigilant. Now, the hypervigilant is very self aware, which is a great quality if you are a first responder. If you're a paramedic, a police officer, a firefighter, you could be in danger potentially all the time. So, self awareness is a great quality. But the extreme is being around somebody who is always paranoid that something bad is going to happen. Have you ever been around somebody like that? And if so, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, definitely. And it is it's exhausting, I think
Yeah.
is what I would say is it's exhausting.
It is exhausting. And in some cases, it can even transfer that negative energy, that anxiety. And that is what we call a saboteur contagion, because somebody's saboteurs are actually infecting your saboteurs and generating negative emotions. So that's the hypervigilant. And then we have the avoider. And the avoider, similarly to the pleaser, likes to make everybody happy. And they do not like toxicity, which is a great thing, right? Avoid toxicity because that won't end well. But they often avoid difficult conversations, tasks that make them uncomfortable, and environments or situations that make them uncomfortable. And, avoidance is not always the answer. What happens if there is somebody, it could be somebody in your family, it could be somebody that you work with, that you feel this irritation towards, or frustration, or resentment, and it's just allowed to build, and you just keep avoiding having a conversation with them. What will eventually happen?
I think one of two things. It either will bubble up at some point, sort of like pressure, in a volcano.
Yeah.
Eventually, it'll blow up, either in that relationship or even worse. in some other relationship, it'll come out sideways, and there will be innocent victims from that, or it metastasizes internally,
Yes.
and a lot of chronic disease uh, is, if not caused by, at least exacerbated by this dynamic.
100%. Yeah, you nailed it. 100%. That is so true. And, it generates a lot of stress on you too, because of that pent up, like you said, anxiety. But, when you avoid tasks or environments that make you uncomfortable, you don't learn and grow. I mean, when things just are easy all the time, rarely is there a lot of effort put into it because it's easy and it becomes routine. And oftentimes can become mundane. And, the avoider is the epitome of the procrastinator. They're really good at procrastinating because they avoid difficult things. And when it comes to tasks, they can be very aligned with the stickler because their mentality is, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. So they avoid it. So avoidance, not always the answer. And then we have the victim, and the victim has this need to, I don't want to say trigger per se, because that makes it has a negative connotation, but they want others to be emotionally reactive to certain topics, or they want them to have that reaction by their actions and what they say. And they may be, meaning the victim, may be empathetic towards others and maybe self-aware, but they're that individual that's always negative all the time. And, my life sucks. Everything bad that can happen in life happens to me. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Everything is just a huge burden. And the sad thing about that is they just want attention, but they go about it the wrong way. And initially, they might get some sympathy, but long term, people are just like, get away from me. I can't stand to be around you. And it's really sad because they end up pushing people away. And then lastly, we have the hyperrational. And the hyperrational is very left brain dominant. They're usually very intelligent, very data driven. They're the kind of individual that does analysis paralysis. If in the workplace they're asked to put together a proposal or complete a project, they provide just an exorbitant amount of data. I mean, they're so data driven that it becomes overwhelming. And again, they could be very intelligent. They could be a medical doctor. They could be a CPA. They could be an attorney. It's really anybody that really operates from that data driven lack of emotion side of their brain. And where they struggle is with empathy. And empathy is really one of the number one qualities that you have to have in order to have quality relationships. Because if you can't be empathetic, it's really going to be challenging to have any kind of depth in relationships. And that is why often this particular individual can come across as cold and unfeeling, and they're not, but they believe that emotions are messy and they detract from what is present at that time, what needs to be addressed at that point in time. So now that you know about all of the 10 saboteur traits, I want to hear from you. Which are the ones that resonate with you the most? Let me hear from you.
I think for me, the restless and the hyperachiever
Okay.
are probably the two that are most true for me.
And where do you see those showing up in your life?
Yeah. I was actually writing a piece about this morning. And uh, there are some leaders, business leaders, who talk about signal and noise,
Mhm.
and paying attention to the signal and blocking out the noise, as a oversimplified way of talking about some of this. And I have ADHD, and so my brain, without intervention, will focus on things, but it wants to always focus on the next thing. And
Yeah.
so the pendulum swings for me between everything being signal and everything being noise. Um,
Okay.
and so, which is, one of the things that one of the observations that people have made, just more generally, not about me, but is that serial entrepreneurs are like that, right? They get
Mhm.
excited about the new thing and they build it to a certain point, but then they get bored, and so like, all right, let's go on to the next thing. Or artists who produce a work or a series of works, and then they're like, all right, time to go on to the next thing. But you have to have enough focus to at least finish a painting, right?
Exactly.
Or finish a poem or finish a short story or whatever. So you have to have enough, excuse me, enough focus to do that. And that's where the the meds and the therapy and the other kind of tips and tricks and hacks can be really helpful.
100%. Yes, that is. Thank you for sharing that. And that makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Well, some of the actually, when we get into some of the techniques to help kind of quiet the mind, I think you might find it interesting. Okay, well, let's move on. Now, the saboteurs, they motivate us through negative emotions, which could include anger, shame, blame, stress, guilt, what have you. Basically, any negative emotion comes from the left side of our brain. Whereas our sage motivates us through those positive emotions like empathy and curiosity and creativity and passion and purpose. So, really, the point is to operate from the sage as much as possible, because you will not only have the greatest success, but sustain happiness. Whereas the saboteurs, especially the hyper rational and the hyperachiever, can be successful. They're not always happy because they're motivated negatively. So I want to ask you, is pain good for you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think pain is our um, hardwired defense against things that aren't good for us. So pain is necessary.
Pain is necessary. Okay. Okay. Here's how you want to, here I want you to think of pain. So, pain is a negative emotion. And if you are sitting in a negative emotion for more than a couple seconds, it is the equivalent of putting your hand on the burner of a hot stove and letting it burn. Would you do that? Probably not. Now, it absolutely serves as an alert to help you recognize that something needs to shift. So, in comparing it to saboteur, contagion, or being hijacked by your saboteurs, yes, recognizing that you are in 1 to 2 seconds is an excellent thing, because then you can shift. But if you allow yourself to continue to be in that negative emotion, basically what happens is it hurts your ability to see the situation clearly, respond with empathy, curiosity, and creativity, or laser focused action. It really just paralyzes us. So, the takeaway that I want you to think of here is, yes, pain can serve as an alert. That's a great thing, but it can only be for 1 to 2 seconds, which I know doesn't sound like a lot of time, but studies have shown, and Shirzad's extensive research has shown, that it will prevent you from operating from your sage if you allow it to last more than 1 to 2 seconds.
Can I ask you a question
Of
about that?
course, please do.
How do you differentiate, or how does he differentiate between pain and discomfort?
Well, your brain, that's a really good question, because your brain doesn't really understand the difference. They're both negative emotions in essence. And I'm going to compare this to like the fight or flight response, which I know is different, but I think you'll understand what I mean. So in the fight or flight response, your body is activated, the central nervous system is activated, thinking that you are potentially in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, if you had a mountain lion directly in your path and they were growling, you probably would go into fight or flight, because that means that, they're either hungry or you ticked them off somehow. And it's not a good
Sure,
situation, right?
sure.
So your body would be activated. Now, if you were in a situation and you were experiencing some kind of discomfort, maybe it's because of you're in an environment that makes you uncomfortable, or you are performing a task and you just don't feel like you're really comfortable in it, or it could be not full-blown physical pain, it could be just borderline. Your body will react the same way. It cannot discern between manufactured fear or emotions, which can be stress, anxiety, overwhelm. The stuff that you manufacture from being stressed in performance or fearful of showing up a certain way, it will react that same way as if you had a predator in front of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Okay. Did I explain that well enough?
I think so.
Okay.
Part of what I look at is um, like if we're exercising, uh, exercise is often uncomfortable because we're trying to get we're
Yes.
pushing our muscles beyond their kind of relaxed state, and so that's not comfortable.
Right.
But if it becomes painful, then that says, oh, we're doing something that's going to cause damage. So I want to back away from the pain, but not necessarily the discomfort.
Right.
Um,
And that's
so
a good
that's
point. And I want you to remember that example, because when we actually get into what we call PQ reps, which is like a micro meditation that kind of helps quiet those negative emotions and prevents it, like in your case, from going from discomfort to full blown pain, there's a
mhm.
technique that you can do that actually makes you focus on that. So we'll talk about that in a minute.
Sure.
But before we do, I want to just quickly talk about the sage again, and how the sage is our right brain, and it has all of our positive emotions. When we're operating from that place, we have peace and calm, clear-headed focus, we can see the big picture, we're more creative. And the mindset of the sage is that every outcome or circumstance can be turned into a gift, an opportunity. How do you feel about that, that every outcome or circumstance can be turned into a gift?
I don't know that I would agree with that, or maybe I would say it differently. In that a gift or an opportunity can follow any outcome or circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, maybe that's mincing words or splitting hairs, but that language feels a little different to me.
Okay.
So
Okay.
maybe I'm just not understanding
Fair enough.
sufficiently your how you're approaching it.
So it's a mindset issue, basically.
Hmm. Hmm.
So let's say, I'm just going to use job loss as an example. So let's say you lost your job. And in a situation like that, it might be very difficult to imagine the gift and opportunity in the situation. So in a situation like that, you would accept it because you can't undo it. It's happened, right? But then moving forward, when you eventually find another opportunity, or maybe you just migrate into something differently altogether, you find that that is more aligned with your value proposition and you really enjoy it and you feel like you can make a positive difference. So later on, you were able to convert that difficult situation to a gift and opportunity. So that could be an example of something that accept now, convert later. Now, if you got a flat tire on the way to an important meeting and you were late for a meeting, okay, again, that could be a little challenging, but depending upon where you got it, if it prevented a blowout on the freeway, which could have caused an accident and caused you to actually injure yourself, if it prevented that, that's the gift. So it's just a different way of looking at things. Does
Yeah,
that make
that's
sense?
helpful. Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay, good. All right. So let's talk about these 5 sage powers. So when you're operating from your right brain and challenges occur, and I want you to think of different areas in your life where you experience challenges. These are 5 powers that you can use to help navigate those. And the first one is called the explore power. And there's 3 components in the explore power. It's asking yourself, what is coming up for me in this situation? How are others reacting? And what about these circumstances can I impact, if at all? So let's say you're walking into a meeting or you had, I don't know, you got into an environment that maybe was negative. And the explorer power would say, okay, what is coming up for me right now? Am I being activated by my saboteurs because they're telling me this is a bad situation, this is not going to end well? Or possibly, how are others reacting? Or the way they're acting, is that saboteur contagion coming into effect where their negative emotions or how they're reacting is influencing my behavior? And then lastly, the circumstances. What about the situation can I impact? And oftentimes you can't. It is what it is. But if there is something that you can't impact, and most often that is how you react to a situation, then that is using the explore power. Make sense? Any questions?
No, that's helpful. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the next is the empathize power. Oops. Now, the empathize power, according to positive intelligence, we look at it as visualizing our inner child. And what I mean by that is, inherently at our core, we're good. We're born into this world with a goodness. Yes, there are some rare exceptions like serial killers or what have you, but for the most part, the human race inherently is good at their core. And this is a particularly great power to use if you're in a confrontational situation. And whatever the individual that you're conversing with, whatever they're saying, their body language, or their tone of voice, could be triggering you in some way because it may be coming across as disrespectful. So, in that situation, you could utilize the empathize power and look at the situation from the lens of this individual's inner child and knowing that, okay, at their core, inherently, they're a good person. They could be having a crappy day. Maybe the person that they talked to prior to me was disrespectful, and unfortunately, that just trickled down to me. Or maybe they're tired, they didn't get a good night's sleep, or they have some major stressors going on in their life. So it's just a way of looking at somebody from a different lens and, not necessarily agreeing with their behavior. You don't have to tolerate toxic behavior. Absolutely don't do that. But I'm referring to more of like the one-off situations that you're having, with somebody and they're coming across a certain way. And it's just a way to look at them and give them a little bit of grace. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like that.
Okay, cool. All right. And then the next one, I love this one. So this is the navigate power. And it's looking at the lens from our older, wiser self. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and your brain is just really activated and you're just ruminating about all different kinds of things and you can't sleep? Ever happen?
Occasionally, yeah.
Occasionally, or maybe just during the day sometimes, it's hard to focus because you've got a lot of things going on. Oftentimes,
Definitely.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Oftentimes in situations like that, we are focusing on many things that are not within our control. Because as humans, we're really good at doing that. We focus
Mm.
on things that are not within our control. And that can just cause us to spin and just overactivate our brains. Now, this power would have you look at it from the lens of your older, wiser self. So imagine that that is happening to you. And you look at it from the lens of your older, wiser self, who can see your entire life in front of them. They can see what you've been ruminating on now, and also just every aspect of your life. What would your older, wiser self tell you in this situation?
Mm. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure.
Oftentimes, they might say something like, is this really that important, what you're focusing on? Are you
Mm.
putting too much emphasis onto this? Is it really generating unnecessary stress? In the whole scheme of things, is it really that relevant? So, what it is, it's looking at the lens from like zooming out and seeing a clear headed picture, big picture. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So that's a great tool to do. Like if you find yourself really worried about something or just ruminating, not even feeling anxious per se, well, that's an activation from your saboteurs. And you could be asking yourself, okay, is this really that important? Why do I keep fixating on this? All right. Now, the next one, and this is a great tool to use if you're in a group, whether it's a family meeting or maybe you lead a group at work or at your church or what have you. And it's really important that everybody in that meeting actually contribute in some way. So, what you can
Mm.
do, just imagine for a minute that you have to have a family discussion about an aging parent or family member that is in need of additional care. And you have to make some hard decisions on what's the best care for them. And assume for a moment that you have a pretty large family, and it's very important that all the siblings and family members help contribute in this conversation. So what you could do is start the conversation with an idea about their care. Maybe it's of a particular place that would be comfortable for them. So you would present that. And then the next person in the group would say, well, what I like about that idea is, and, and then they would add a different suggestion. And it could be, well, I heard about this place because it allows them to still be kind of self-sufficient to a point, but there are people on the premises that check in on them, or maybe another idea would be home health care, just what have you. So it's literally going around and allowing everybody to contribute in this conversation in a positive way by recognizing who just spoke and saying, what I like about that is, because according to the sage, we're all 10% right,
Mm.
or meaning 10% of the ideas are good, at least 10% of them. And this can help take away that judgment, because oftentimes in situations like this, when you're brainstorming, it's really easy to turn into criticism and say, well, that idea is not going to work because it's too expensive, or they need more care than that. That's not going to work. So you immediately gravitate into judgment, which is saboteur influenced.
Mm.
Whereas this keeps you in the right side of your brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful.
Can you see possibly using this?
Yeah, we in some of my work we talk about improv, the
Mm-hmm.
rules of improv, and even playing improv games as a way to help people learn this, the yes and
Yes, definitely.
feel.
Definitely. All
So I
right.
like the way you've articulated it also.
Oh, thank you. Okay. And the last sage power is the activate power. And the activate power is taking decisive action by focusing on one small step. And the key to do this is to one, preempt any saboteur interference. So let's say you have a project that you need to complete, or you have a home improvement task, or something that is a pretty big deal that needs to happen. And the thought of starting it is overwhelming. And if you have avoider tendencies at times, your avoider is activated saying, well, I just can't start this. It's just too much. So it prevents that from happening. Whereas if you're in your sage would say, okay, I see you, avoider. I see you are trying to influence a situation. So what I'm going to do is ask myself, what is needed right now? What's one small step that I could do that just can move me in this direction? And maybe if it's a project that you're working on, maybe it's brainstorming on some people that you want to work with, or it could be creating an outline for a presentation as opposed to doing the whole presentation. It's taking that first small step that helps build that self-efficacy so that you are more inclined to continue. And when you preempt any saboteur interference, then you're kind of taking away their power. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I know we're getting close on time here. So I want to just quickly go over what we call 10 to 15-second PQ reps. Now, if you're really hijacked and your saboteurs are just having a field day here, and you know you need to shift to that positive sage perspective, but it's really hard, you're having a hard time, we utilize what are called 10 to 15-second PQ reps, which in essence are micro meditations that engage our senses. And what they do is they help take away the power or kind of quiet those negative emotions so that you can then shift to that sage perspective and look at a challenge with curiosity and clear headed laser focus. So let's do these together so you can understand how they work. And I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. And if you have any questions at the end, we can certainly talk about it later because there's so much that we could talk about here. But for sake of time, I don't want to inundate you. So I want you to look at something in your immediate environment, something in front of you. I don't care what it is, but I want you to
Hmm.
stare at it and stare at it as if you've never seen it before. And notice tiny details, colors, shapes, maybe a reflection in the surface. Just really stare at it. So that's one way, is by staring at something. Next could be touch. So that object that you were looking at, you can now touch it, but I want you to touch it in such a way as if you can't see it, which you probably already know what it is, but humor me. Pretend that you can't see it and you've never seen it before. And you're literally using your hands as your eyes. And you're noticing, the texture, the shape, the angles of it. Is it smooth? And you're really trying to figure out what it is. Now, you could also do something as simple as rubbing two fingertips together. And I do this all the time. And in fact, this little exercise helped me prevent a TEDx disaster. And I did a social media post on it today, so you can read about what the story was. But if you want to check out my TED Talk, there's the link. But basically what it is you rub your index finger and your thumb together. But when you do that, you do it in such a way that you're noticing your fingertip ridges. Are they dry? Are they smooth? What's the temperature of your fingertips? And I like these because if you're activated in a situation, maybe that is contentious, you could have your hand in your pocket doing this. You could have your hands in your lap. You can do this very subtly without, looking totally obvious. So it's a good one to do in the heat of the moment.
Mm.
Sound is another great one too. And I do this in the morning. I take an hour walk most mornings. And I spend probably a good 20 minutes on my walk just noticing every single sound I can hear. And, I get out super early because, as you know, it's like the surface
Mm-hmm.
of the sun here in the
Mm-hmm.
summer. So it's quiet. It's around 6:30, hearing birds chirping, crickets, sometimes cicadas, maybe a car, now school buses because kids are back in school. Could be an airplane. If I'm walking briskly, it could be the sound of my breath, it could be the feet on the pavement. But I make it kind of a game as far as how many of these sounds can I hear? And
Mm.
these are great things that you can do throughout the day as well. And then there's the breath also, just focusing if you're in a quiet space and you can just focus on the sound of your breath and take slow, deep breaths. That's a great way, especially if you're activated, really kind of going into that flight or flight response. That's a really great way to kind of deactivate it and just slow your heart rate and reset your central nervous system. So I know that was really fast. I could spend hours talking about this and everything, but
Yeah.
but think about, things like throughout your day, like if you're going to the bathroom and you're washing your hands afterwards, notice the sensation of the water and the soap,
Mm.
and then as you're drying your hands, or if you're making your coffee or tea in the morning, the sound as you're pouring it in a mug or what have you. So just different things like that. All
Mm.
right. Do you have any questions?
No, those are good tips. I like the somatic engagement as a way to get us out of our uh,
Yes. Yes.
frontal cortex.
So, for sake of time, um, if you wouldn't mind taking a picture of this, or if you want to just scan the QR code and just keep it on your phone,
Mm-hmm.
I would love your feedback on what you thought of this presentation and be honest. Are there things I could have done better? Are there things you wish I had spent more time on? As a thank you, you have the link in here to the saboteur assessment that I had mentioned previously. You also get a free workbook, which pairs with my first book, which was a international bestseller. And there's an exercise in here that kind of it gets you to create your vision statement. So yes, if you would do that,
Yeah,
that would be
definitely.
great. And then quickly, just a call to action. And I want you to just, Ken, this would be more for if you come across anybody who might be interested. This is how I work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I offer a 12-week course that takes a deep dive into what we talked about. And I mean, we've barely scratched the surface, but this is what makes our program different. And I've had a lot of people that ask me, what is PQ? How is that different from EQ? Emotional intelligence and all this. And the thing is, we might use some of the principles, like empathy, obviously in emotional intelligence. But the thing about this is it's an operating system. And the focus when you are taking this 12-week course is you're building habits, these PQ habits that actually help you create neural pathways so that you remember this material. Oftentimes, I'm sure you can relate, you've been to trainings and you just get fed so much phenomenal information, but it tends to be overwhelming. And then when you leave the event and you get back to life, you've forgotten half of it, or you just don't apply it because you don't go back and
Mm-hmm.
look at your notes.
Yeah.
So we treat the root cause to rewire your brain. And we do that by catching saboteurs, really getting to develop your sage and navigating challenges. So what does this look like? So it's one operating system, but it can be used for all different things.
Hmm.
You could use PQ for leadership development. You can use it for trauma. You could use it for stress management, for improving communication. So I'm just going to go through this quickly because I know we're out of time. Okay. And this is the price. So so that you know. So it's a $3,000 course and it's for 12
Hmm.
weeks. And when I do these webinars and people attend the webinars, I always offer it for half price for one day. And if, they decide to sign up for one day, then they can get this price. And I split payments too, because I know it's an
Hmm.
investment. So,
Sure.
and this is what it is, the 12-week course, which technically the course itself is $1,000. That's what Positive Intelligence charges for it. And you could
Okay.
go to Positive Intelligence and do that, but you would get no coaching with it. And you would not get the year access. So
Mm.
this is where I come into play.
Yeah.
And you get 7 weekly 1 hour sessions. So that is it. I am
Awesome.
going to stop sharing. I apologize for going over. Do you have any questions, comments, any feedback?
Um, but yeah, well, I would say you didn't actually go over because you delayed, so it's still less than an hour. So um, yeah, so I don't know if you and I talked about this before or not. I can't remember, but I actually started the PQ training. Um, I don't know, April maybe, and
Oh,
did
good.
about
Okay.
six weeks of it, and just decided it wasn't what I was looking for.
Okay.
In part because I've got my own IP
Hmm.
that I've developed, and it just was getting confusing, um, kind of crossing brands and whatnot. So that was kind of the um, biggest reason for me to not do it. But I think there is a lot in there that's definitely valuable. So I really appreciate. Um, yeah, and like I say, I was really interested to kind of see your approach and see you in action. So
Well, thank
I hope
you.
that my participation was helpful. I don't, do you,
Yeah.
so I know you recorded it. Do you then go back and show these? Like, are